Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the hallowed halls of a great 19th century hospital, a place that was considered the absolute pinnacle of medical science and education. Imagine gas lights hissing in the long corridors, the sharp, clean smell of carbolic acid, and the confident, authoritative voices of brilliant physicians who believed they were finally conquering human disease with reason and science. But we're heading to one specific department, the maternity ward, a place that should have been a place of joy, but which, in this great hospital, was known as the death ward. Tonight's story is about the horrifying and entirely preventable death of thousands of new mothers, and the lonely, stubborn doctor who figured out why. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't have survived the experience. Not as a patient. Forget the fever that came after childbirth. You probably wouldn't have survived the doctor himself. In the 1840s, it was considered perfectly normal, even a sign of scientific diligence, for your physician to come directly from performing an autopsy in the morgue to deliver your baby, without so much as rinsing his hands. The doctor was often the most dangerous thing in the room, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a quiet and simple way to support the channel. And while you're at it, I'd love to see where and when you're tuning in from. Go ahead and drop your city and local time in the comments. It's always a little fascinating to see our community of history lovers spread across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You have arrived. After years of long, grueling study at the university, you have finally achieved your dream. You have secured a coveted position as a junior doctor at the Vienna General Hospital, the Allgemeines Krankenhaus der Stadt Wien. The year's 1846, and this is the medical center of the universe. The hospital is a city within a city, a vast, sprawling complex of neoclassical buildings, courtyards, and lecture halls. It is the largest and most prestigious teaching hospital in the world, a beacon of the new, scientific medicine. The finest medical minds of Europe are gathered here, and students and young doctors like yourself flock from all corners of the continent to learn from them. To have a position here is to be at the absolute cutting edge of your profession. You walk through its great iron gates for the first time, your new doctor's coat feeling stiff and important on your shoulders, and you are filled with a profound sense of pride and purpose. You have been assigned to the first obstetrical clinic, the maternity ward. This is a field of immense importance, and Vienna is its leading institution. You are here to learn the art and science of bringing new life into the world under the tutelage of the great Professor Johann Klein, the head of the clinic. Professor Klein is a formidable figure, a man of immense authority and unshakable confidence. He is a proponent of the new school of heroic medicine. This is the prevailing medical philosophy of your time. It holds that disease is a great and powerful enemy, and that a physician must be equally bold and aggressive in his treatments. You do not coax the body back to health with gentle remedies. You attack the disease with powerful interventions. You purge the bowels with strong purgatives. You restore the balance of the humors with the lancet, bleeding pints of blood from a patient to cool their fevers. It is a dramatic, forceful, and deeply respected school of thought. The first clinic is a long, high-ceilinged ward, filled with row upon row of simple iron beds. It is always crowded, always noisy. The patients here are the poor women of Vienna. The Vienna General Hospital is a state-funded institution, offering free medical care to those who cannot afford a private physician. But this charity comes with a price, in exchange for their free care. The patients become teaching material for the hundreds of medical students and junior doctors like yourself who work here. This is the central, unspoken contract of a great 19th century teaching hospital, a subject of debate for future historians. Is it an institution of healing or an institution of learning? Is its primary purpose to care for the poor, or is it to use the bodies of the poor to advance the cause of medical science? You, a young and ambitious doctor, try not to think about this question too much. You are here to learn. And these women, their bodies, their complications, their tragedies, they are your textbooks. Your daily routine is established quickly. The day begins with morning rounds. You and a dozen other young doctors follow Professor Klein as he sweeps through the ward. He is like a general reviewing his troops. He stops at a bedside, asks a few sharp questions, pronounces a diagnosis with absolute certainty, and then moves on, his flock of students trailing in his wake. The afternoons are for learning of a different kind. You go to the hospital's pathology wing. The morgue. It is a cold, stone room that smells of carbolic acid and death. And here, you learn the secrets of the human body by dissecting the bodies of the women who have died in your own clinic. The Vienna School is famous for its emphasis on pathological anatomy. The great belief is that by understanding the pathways of disease in the dead, you can better learn to treat the living. You spend your afternoons with a scalpel in your hand, tracing the ravages of disease on the internal organs of your former patients. It is here that you first begin to notice your immediate superior. He is a young Hungarian doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis. He is an assistant to Professor Klein, but he is a strange, intense, and deeply troubled man. He seems to have a perpetually worried, almost haunted look in his eyes. He is meticulous in his work in the autopsy room, but he seems to carry a heavy weight upon his shoulders. At first, you are too busy, too overwhelmed, too full of the pride of your new position to think much about it. You are learning so much. You are assisting in deliveries. You are studying your textbooks. You are participating in the great scientific enterprise of this magnificent hospital. You are a man of science, a conqueror of disease. The hospital is so vast you feel you need a map to get from your dormitory to the dining hall. The work is exhausting, the hours endless, but it is exhilarating. But after a few weeks, you begin to notice something strange. A pattern, a quiet, terrifying undercurrent beneath the confident, scientific surface of your clinic. You notice it in the eyes of the pregnant women as they are being admitted. There is a specific kind of dread, a pleading terror, in the eyes of the women who are assigned a bed in your ward. The first clinic. One day, you are in the admissions hall, and you overhear two pregnant women talking in hushed, fearful whispers. Pray to the Virgin that they send you to the second clinic. One woman says to the other, "My sister was in the first clinic last year, and she never came home." The other woman crosses herself, her eyes wide with fear. "Everyone knows," she says. "To go to the first clinic is a death sentence. It is the death ward." The words send a chill down your spine. The second clinic. You know of it. Of course, it is the other maternity ward in the hospital. The two clinics are identical. They are in the same building. They use the same equipment. They admit the same kinds of patients from the same poor districts of Vienna. But there's one crucial difference. The first clinic, your clinic, is the teaching clinic for the university's medical students and doctors. The second clinic is the teaching clinic for the city's midwives and the women of Vienna. The poor, uneducated women who are the patients of this great hospital. All know a terrible secret that the great, learned physicians do not seem to have noticed. The women who are cared for by the midwives in the second clinic live, and the women who are cared for by the doctors in your clinic, the first clinic, die. They die of a specific, horrifying, and seemingly unstoppable illness. A few days after giving birth, they develop a raging fever, a pain in their belly, a foul-smelling discharge, and then, in a matter of days, they are dead. It is called childbed fever or puerperal fever, and in your clinic, it is an epidemic. The death rate is astronomical, sometimes as high as 1 in every 10 women who gives birth. In the midwife's clinic, next door, the rate is a fraction of that. You start paying attention. You start looking at the numbers. And you realize the women are right. Your clinic, the clinic run by the most famous and respected physicians in Europe, is a death trap, while the clinic next door, run by uneducated, traditional midwives, is a place of safety. This is the great, terrifying, and unspoken mystery of the Vienna General Hospital. And it is a mystery that is a source of constant, obsessive torment for your strange, intense superior, Dr. Semmelweis. You see him pacing the wards at night. You see him poring over the death registers, his face a mask of frustrated anguish. He is a man who is hunting for a ghost. You finish your day. You have assisted in a difficult birth in the morning. In the afternoon, you performed an autopsy on the body of a woman who died of childbed fever just yesterday. And now, you are on your way back to the maternity ward to check on your patients before your shift ends. You walk down the long, gaslit corridor that connects the pathology wing to the main hospital. You are still wearing your doctor's coat, the one that is stained with small, unidentifiable fluids from the autopsy room. You do not think to wash your hands. Why would you? You are a gentleman, a man of science, and the smell that clings to your hands. A faint, sweetish, cadaverous odor. Is the smell of knowledge? You enter the first clinic. Your clinic, the death ward, and you walk to the bedside of a young woman who has just given birth to a healthy baby boy. You are here to perform a routine postpartum examination, and as you reach out your unwashed hands to touch her, you do not know that you are not a healer. You are a vector. You are the angel of death, dressed in a doctor's coat, and you are bringing the unseen particles of the morgue directly into the most vulnerable bodies of the living. The words of the pregnant women in the admissions hall. To go to the first clinic is a death sentence echo in your mind. They are a direct, personal accusation, a piece of common, uneducated folklore that stands in stark opposition to everything you know, everything you believe. You are a man of science. Your clinic, the first obstetrical clinic, is run by the finest, most learned physicians in Europe. The second clinic is run by midwives, women who practice a trade based on tradition and folk wisdom, not on the rigorous, scientific principles of modern medicine. It is impossible that their clinic could be safer. It is an insult to your profession. And yet, you cannot shake the feeling of dread. You begin to pay attention. You become like your quiet and intense superior, Dr. Semmelweis, an observer of a terrible unfolding mystery. Your first task is to confirm the data. You are a man of science, and science requires numbers. With a growing sense of horror, you begin to study the hospital's own meticulous records. You spend your evenings in the clerk's office, poring over the great leather-bound ledgers, the records of births and deaths for the past year. The numbers are unambiguous, and they are damning. The truth is even worse than the folklore, in some months. The mortality rate from childbed fever in your clinic, the doctor's clinic, is as high as 18%. 1 in every 5 women who comes to you for care, who places her life in the hands of the most educated physicians in the world, dies a horrible, feverish death. You then examine the records for the second clinic, the midwife's clinic, located just down the corridor. The numbers are so low they seem impossible. Their mortality rate is often less than 2%. It makes no sense. The two clinics are identical in almost every respect. They are in the same hospital building. They admit the same poor women from the same districts of Vienna. They use the same food from the same kitchens, the same linens from the same laundry. The climate is the same. The very air they breathe is the same. And yet, to be assigned a bed in the first clinic is to face a risk of death nearly 10 times greater than in the second. The women of Vienna are not superstitious. They are statisticians. They have learned to fear your clinic because the numbers prove that their fear is rational. This mystery becomes the consuming obsession of Dr. Semmelweis, and you are drawn into his frantic, desperate search for an answer. He is a man possessed. You see him pacing the wards late at night, his face a mask of anguish. He is constantly taking notes, compiling tables of data, talking to himself in low, urgent whispers. He begins a systematic, almost monomaniacal. Investigation to eliminate every possible variable, every potential cause for the discrepancy. First, he considers the popular theory of the day miasma. Perhaps, he theorizes, there is a unique epidemic influence, a foul, death-dealing vapor. That is concentrated in your part of the hospital. It seems unlikely, but it must be tested. Semmelweis orders that the windows of the first clinic be kept open day and night. Regardless of the weather, he institutes a new, rigorous ventilation protocol. The ward becomes a cold, drafty place. But the death rate does not change. The miasma theory is a dead end. Next, he investigates the possibility of overcrowding. Perhaps your clinic admits more patients, creating a more crowded, less sanitary environment. You and he undertake a meticulous census. You count every bed. You measure the square footage of the wards. You compare the admission numbers. The result, there is no significant difference. The two clinics are equally crowded. Another theory collapses. Then he moves on to the daily routines. Is there a difference in the care provided? You investigate everything. The food the women eat, the way their bedding is laundered, the religious rites performed. The only significant difference you can find is a strange and seemingly trivial one. The priest who administers the last rites to the dying patients in the main hospital has to pass through the first clinic to reach the infirmary. He is preceded by an acolyte ringing a small bell to clear a path. Semmelweis, in his desperation, seizes on this. He develops a psychological theory. Perhaps, he argues, the sight of the priest and the sound of his death bell so terrifies the new mothers in your ward, fills them with such a profound sense of dread, that this fear itself induces the fever. It is a wild, almost absurd idea, but it must be tested. Semmelweis confronts the hospital's chaplain and demands that he change his route. The priest, annoyed but intimidated by the doctor's fierce intensity, agrees. He now approaches the infirmary through a different corridor, and he silences his bell. You and Semmelweis wait, anxiously, for the weekly mortality figures. The result is heartbreaking. The death rate remains exactly the same. The priest's bell is not the cause. The head of your clinic, the great Professor Klein, has his own theory. He believes the difference lies in the examinations. He argues that you and the other medical students, in your scientific zeal, are perhaps too rough, too frequent, and too intrusive in your examinations of the laboring women, causing injuries that then lead to the fever. The midwives, he posits, are gentler, more hands-off. It is a theory that places the blame on you, the junior doctors. But Semmelweis, in his methodical pursuit of the truth, agrees to test it. He dramatically reduces the number of examinations performed by students. He institutes a new policy of less touching. The medical education of your cohort suffers. You are now learning obstetrics by watching from a distance. It's a novel approach to medical training learning by not doing. And still, the women die. The death rate does not budge. The apathetic gazes of the dying mothers, the wails of the newborn infants who will now be sent to the city orphanage, these are the constants in your life. As you work, you become intimately familiar with the disease itself. Childbed fever is not one thing, but a collection of horrifying symptoms. A total systemic collapse. It begins a day or two after delivery with a chill, a headache. Then the fever spikes, raging and relentless. The woman's abdomen becomes tender, then swollen and rigid, a foul-smelling. Brownish discharge begins to seep from her. Her pulse becomes rapid and thin. She grows delirious, her mind lost in a fog of fever. And then, after a few days of this agony, comes the quiet, final mercy of death. The great medical minds of your time are engaged in a fierce academic debate about the nature of this disease. Is it one specific, unique entity, a puerperal fever that only affects new mothers? Or is it simply a collection of other known diseases? Typhus, peritonitis, blood poisoning that are given a single name when they happen to occur in a woman who has just given birth. Without the unifying concept of germ theory, they are like blind men describing an elephant. They can describe the parts, the fever, the inflammation, the sepsis, but they cannot see the single underlying cause. They cannot see the monster itself. You, a junior doctor, are not involved in these high-level debates. You are involved in the consequences. Your primary role, aside from assisting in the deliveries, is in the autopsy room. This is the cornerstone of the Vienna School's medical philosophy. Every woman who dies in your clinic is autopsied, and you are the one who helps to perform the procedure. Your afternoons are a grim routine of dissecting the bodies of the very women you tried to save just days before. You work in the cold, stone morgue, the air thick with the smell of death and carbolic acid. You learn the geography of the disease. You see the inflamed uterus, the abscesses on the ovaries, the peritonitis that has turned the abdominal cavity into a stinking, purulent mess. You are becoming an expert in the anatomy of death. And then, after your long, bloody afternoon in the morgue, you do what every other doctor and student in your clinic does. You wipe your hands on a communal towel, you put on your coat, and you walk back to the maternity ward for evening rounds. You walk from the world of the dead directly into the world of the living, of the vulnerable, of the new mothers, and you do not wash your hands. The idea would never occur to you. Your hands are not dirty. They are stained with the residue of your scientific work. You are a gentleman, a man of science. Hand washing is something that surgeons might do after an operation. To clean themselves. The idea that you should wash your hands before touching a patient. To protect them from something unseen that you might be carrying. Is a concept that does not exist in your medical universe. It is an idea that has not yet been invented. So you move from bed to bed, your unwashed hands carrying the invisible, microscopic particles of death from the autopsy table, and you perform your examinations. You are a healer. You are a man of science. And you are, without a shadow of a doubt, the single greatest danger to the women you are trying to save. You are the miasma. You are the angel of death, moving silently from bed to bed, and you have absolutely no idea. The mystery of the two clinics remains unsolved. Every theory has been tested. Every variable has been eliminated. And still, the women in your care continue to die at a rate that is a scandal. A horror? Dr. Semmelweis is on the verge of a nervous breakdown. He is a man haunted by the deaths he cannot prevent. He is a rational man in an irrational world, and the puzzle is driving him mad. He sits in his office for hours, staring at his charts, at his numbers, at the terrible, inexplicable discrepancy between the first and second clinics. The solution is right in front of him. It is in the daily routine, in a simple mundane act that is so common, so accepted, that no one has ever thought to question it. The truth is there, waiting, but it will take another death, a tragic and accidental death, to finally make him see it. The mystery of the two clinics settles into the very stones of the Vienna General Hospital, a silent, unsolvable, and deeply shameful riddle. Dr. Semmelweis, your superior, is a man tormented. He has exhausted every scientific theory, every logical possibility. The miasma, the overcrowding, the diet, the rough examinations. Even the priest's bell he has investigated and dismissed them all. And still, the women in your clinic, the first clinic, die and still. The women in the midwife's clinic, the second clinic, live. The death toll becomes a monotonous, soul-numbing rhythm. You, a young doctor who arrived in Vienna filled with the pride of your new, scientific profession, now feel like an executioner. Your daily routine is a journey from the beds of the dying to the autopsy tables of the dead. And then back again. You feel helpless, and worse. You feel complicit, You are part of a system that is inexplicably and efficiently killing the very people you have sworn to heal. In the spring of 1847, the strain becomes too much for Dr. Semmelweis. He is granted a leave of absence from the hospital. He travels to Venice, hoping the change of scenery will clear his mind of the obsessive, circular puzzle that is destroying him. You and the other junior doctors are left in charge of the death ward, under the uncaring eye of Professor Klein, and the dying continues unabated. It is during Semmelweis's absence that the terrible accidental clue falls into your lap. The news spreads through the hospital like a shockwave. A respected professor, Jakob Kolechka, has died. He was the professor of forensic medicine, a man who had spent his entire career among the dead. He was a close friend of Semmelweis. His death was sudden, unexpected, and the cause was baffling. And you learn the story from your fellow students in the hospital's dining hall. During an autopsy he was performing for his students, one of the more clumsy pupils accidentally pricked the professor's finger with the scalpel he was using. It was a minor wound, a simple cut, the kind of occupational hazard that men in your profession face every day. No one thought anything of it. But a few days later, Professor Kolechka developed a violent fever. He was seized by chills. He fell into a delirium. And then he died. His body racked with a sickness that mirrored, with horrifying precision, the symptoms of the very women whose deaths he had spent a lifetime investigating. When Dr. Semmelweis returns from his Venetian holiday, rested but no closer to an answer, he is met with the tragic news of his friend's death. He is devastated, as a man of science, and as Kolechka's friend. He demands to see the full autopsy report. You are in his small, cluttered office when the report arrives. Semmelweis sits at his desk, his face a mask of grief. He begins to read the document, his finger tracing the lines of Latin text. You stand by the window, a silent observer. He reads the findings aloud, his voice a low, mournful murmur. He reads of the inflammation of the lymphatic and venous systems. He reads of the phlebitis, the pleurisy, the peritonitis. He reads of the abscesses found in the liver. As he reads, his voice begins to change. The grief is replaced by a new sound, a sound of intense, almost frightening, concentration. He stops reading. He looks up from the page. But his eyes are not focused on you. They are focused on some new, terrible idea that is beginning to form in his mind. The same, he whispers. It is exactly the same. You do not understand? What is the same, doctor? He looks at you now, and his eyes are wide. Not with grief, but with a brilliant, terrifying light. It is the look of a man who has been stumbling in a dark room for years and has just, by complete accident, found the door. The pathology, he says, his voice trembling with the force of his revelation. The findings in my friend Kolechka's body, they are identical, organ by organ, symptom by symptom, to the findings in the bodies of the women who die of childbed fever, the pieces of the puzzle, the pieces he has been turning over and over in his mind for years, now begin to fall into place with a stunning, horrifying, and world-changing clarity. Kolechka was not a pregnant woman. He was not a new mother. He was a man. He could not have died of childbed fever. But he died of the same internal putrefaction, the same systemic infection. What was the connection? What was the one thing Professor Kolechka, a man, had in common with the thousands of dead mothers from the first clinic? The answer is so simple, so obvious, so horrifyingly mundane, that it has been invisible to everyone. The autopsy room. Kolechka was pricked by a scalpel that had been used to dissect a corpse. He was, in effect, inoculated directly into his bloodstream with something from that dead body. And what did he, Semmelweis, and you, and every other doctor and medical student in the first clinic, do every single afternoon you spent your afternoons in the morgue, your hands covered in the fluids and tissues of the autopsy dead? And then you walk directly from the morgue to the maternity ward, and with those same unwashed hands. You performed intimate internal examinations on the new mothers, women whose bodies were filled with the small, open wounds and tears of childbirth you were carrying on your hands, some invisible, unknown, and deadly substance from the corpses into the bodies of the living. Semmelweis, in his writings, would give it a name. He called it cadaverous particles. You are watching one of the great epiphanies in the history of science. It is a moment that future philosophers of science will study. Scientific discovery is not always a slow, methodical process of accumulating facts. Sometimes it is a sudden, brilliant, intuitive leap, a paradigm shift triggered by a chance event, an analogy, an accident. The death of one man has, in a flash of insight, explained the deaths of thousands of women. And now, the final piece of the puzzle clicks into place. The great mystery of the two clinics, the midwives, the women who ran the second clinic, the clinic with the miraculously low death rate. What was the crucial difference? It was not their gender. It was not their methods. It was their curriculum. The midwives were not part of the university's scientific pathological anatomy program. They did not perform autopsies. They never set foot in the morgue. Their hands were clean. Your hands. The hands of the educated, scientific, and respectable male doctors were, in fact, filthy. You were the carriers. You were the source of the pestilence. The great, terrifying mystery that had haunted the Vienna General Hospital for years was solved. The death ward was not haunted by a miasma or a curse, or the sound of a priest's bell. It was haunted by the doctors themselves. Semmelweis leaps to his feet, his exhaustion, his despair, all gone, replaced by a fierce, righteous, and holy energy. He has found his enemy, and it is not some mysterious force of nature. It is the filth on his own hands. He looks at you, his eyes blazing with the fire of his discovery. He looks down at his own hands, the hands of a healer, as if seeing them for the first time. "We are going to wash our hands," he says. The statement is so simple, so mundane, that for a moment, it sounds anticlimactic. But you know, in that instant, that it is the most revolutionary idea in the history of medicine. It is an idea that will save millions of lives. It is an idea that will change the world. And it is an idea that the world is not yet ready to hear. The death of Professor Kolechka has given your superior, Dr. Semmelweis, the key to the great, terrible mystery. He now understands the ghost that has been haunting your clinic. It is not a miasma. It is not a curse. It is an invisible filth, a cadaverous particle that you and your fellow doctors have been carrying on your hands from the autopsy room to the bedsides of your patients. He has solved the riddle. Now, he must convince the world. And the world, you will soon learn, does not like to be told that its most respected and educated men are unintentional killers. Semmelweis, now filled with the righteous, almost manic fire of a man who holds a great and terrible truth, immediately goes to the head of the clinic. Professor Klein, he explains his theory. He presents his logic. Kolechka died from a scalpel wound, contaminated by a corpse. The women of the first clinic are dying from the hands of doctors contaminated by those same corpses. The midwives in the second clinic do not touch corpses, therefore. Their hands are clean, and their patients live. The logic is simple, elegant, and inescapable. Professor Klein is not impressed. He is offended. The theory is an insult. It implies that he, the great professor, and his esteemed colleagues are no better than common poisoners. It suggests that the midwives, with their unscientific traditional ways, are superior practitioners. It is a direct assault on the pride and prestige of the entire Vienna School of Medicine. But Semmelweis is persistent. He is the professor's official assistant, and he has a degree of authority over the day-to-day running of the clinic. And his logic, however insulting, is difficult to refute. After a series of heated arguments, Professor Klein gives his grudging, reluctant permission for Semmelweis to try his new strange, and, in Klein's opinion, deeply humiliating. Preventative measure. And so, in May of 1847, a new ritual is instituted in the first obstetrical clinic. It is a revolution that begins not with a bang, but with a bucket. Semmelweis places large basins at the entrance to the ward, and he fills them with a strange, harsh-smelling liquid. It is a solution of chlorinated lime, or calcium hypochlorite. You know it as a substance used for bleaching linens, a foul-smelling chemical with a sharp, acrid bite. Semmelweis has chosen it for a simple and, as it turns out, brilliant reason. After trying many different substances, he found that only this chlorine solution was strong enough to completely remove the lingering, foul, cadaverous smell from his hands after he had been in the autopsy room. He was, in essence, fighting a smell. He had no concept of germs, of bacteria, of microbes. He only knew that the smell of death and the sickness of death were connected, and he was determined to wash the smell away. A large sign is posted at the entrance to the ward, written in Semmelweis's own hand. The new rule is simple, and it is absolute. Every doctor, every medical student, before they enter the clinic and before they touch any patient, must wash their hands and forearms thoroughly in the chlorine solution until the smell of the morgue is completely gone. You and your fellow junior doctors are outraged. It is a bizarre and insulting ritual. The chlorine solution is harsh. It stings your skin. It dries out your hands, leaving them red, chapped and cracked. It is time-consuming. You feel that you are being forced to participate in the strange, obsessive-compulsive ritual of a man who is clearly on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The new hospital fashion, you joke darkly with your colleagues, is smelling faintly of bleach. It is not a pleasant perfume, but it is. You will soon learn. The smell of life. Semmelweis is a tyrant in the enforcement of his new rule. He stands at the entrance to the ward like a guard, watching everyone. He inspects your hands, he smells your hands. If he detects even the faintest cadaverous odor, he sends you back to the basin. He openly berates senior physicians who perform the washing with a dismissive haste. He becomes the most unpopular man in the hospital. His colleagues begin to mock him, to call him a fanatic. His theory, they say, is an insult to their status as gentlemen. A gentleman's hands, they argue, are always clean. This is where the tragedy of Semmelweis, the man, begins to emerge. He is a brilliant scientist, but he is a terrible politician. He has discovered a profound truth, but he has no idea how to gently persuade other people to accept it. He does not use diplomacy. He uses brute force and public humiliation. Historians will later debate this aspect of his character. Was his eventual downfall caused simply by the arrogance of the medical establishment, or did his own abrasive, confrontational, and deeply undiplomatic personality make it impossible for his proud and powerful colleagues to accept an idea that was already an insult to their profession? But while Semmelweis is losing friends, he is winning the war. At the end of the first month, May 1847, he compiles the mortality statistics for the clinic. And the numbers are startling. The death rate, which in the previous month had been over 18%, has dropped to just over 2%. It is a stunning success. But the other doctors are skeptical. It is a coincidence, they say, a statistical anomaly. Many diseases have a natural ebb and flow. This is just a lucky month. Then come the numbers for June. The death rate falls again to just over 1%. It is now lower than the death rate in the midwife's clinic. Then comes July, and then August, month after month. The death rate in your clinic, the infamous death ward, remains near zero. The change is not a coincidence. It is a miracle. It is a direct and undeniable result of the simple, irritating, and world-changing act of washing your hands in a bowl of chlorinated lime. The evidence is irrefutable. You see it in your own ledgers. The long columns of deaths that you so grimly recorded have been replaced by a beautiful, empty space. The women who enter your clinic are now surviving. The beds are filled not with the dying, but with healthy mothers, and they're crying. healthy babies. The very atmosphere in the ward has changed, from one of dread and despair to one of hope and relief. The final, tragic, and irrefutable proof of Semmelweis's theory comes in October. A small cluster of new cases of childbed fever suddenly erupts in a single corner of the ward. 5 women, all of whom had been healthy, suddenly develop the fever. 3 of them die. Semmelweis is devastated, and he investigates with a furious energy. What happened? What was the breach in his system? He questions everyone, and he discovers the cause. All 5 of the women had been examined by the same visiting physician, an old, respected, and deeply traditional doctor from another city who had been observing the work of the famous Vienna hospital. The old doctor, considering Semmelweis's hand-washing rule to be a bizarre and insulting local custom, had ignored it. He had come, as was his habit, directly from observing an autopsy, and had examined the women with his unwashed hands, and he had killed them, as surely as if he had stabbed them with a knife. Semmelweis confronts the old doctor publicly. The scene is terrible. The truth is laid bare for all to see. The cadaverous particles are real. They are carried on the hands of doctors, and they are fatal. You look at the mortality charts for your clinic. You see the line that had been so terrifyingly high plummet to almost nothing for 5 straight months. And then you see the small, sharp, tragic spike caused by the hands of a single. Arrogant man, the mystery of the 2 clinics is solved. The ghost that haunted your ward has been identified. And it is the pride, the ignorance, and the unwashed hands of your own profession. You stand in your ward, a place that has been transformed from a slaughterhouse into a sanctuary, and you look at your own hands. They are chapped, and they are raw, and they smell faintly of bleach, and you know that you are looking at the 2 most powerful medical instruments in the world. You have found the truth. Dr. Semmelweis, through his brilliant, obsessive, and grief-stricken deduction, has solved the great mystery of the 2 clinics. The ghost that haunted your ward has been identified, and it is the invisible filth on the hands of the doctors themselves. The simple revolutionary act of washing with a chlorine solution has turned your death ward into a sanctuary. The death rate has plummeted to a level that is even lower than that of the midwives' clinic. You, and the other junior doctors who have witnessed this miracle firsthand, are now true believers. You are zealous converts to the new religion of cleanliness. You wash your hands with a fervent, almost ritualistic devotion. You look at your own hands, chapped and raw from the chlorine, and you see them as instruments of life, newly purified. You expect your discovery to be hailed as a great triumph of the Vienna school. You expect Dr. Semmelweis to be celebrated as a hero, a savior of mothers. You expect your simple life-saving method to be immediately adopted by every hospital in Europe. You are about to learn a hard and bitter lesson about the nature of men, and the stubborn pride of an establishment. The reaction of the senior medical faculty of the Vienna General Hospital, led by your own chief, Professor Klein, is not one of gratitude. It is one of cold, simmering, and deeply offended hostility. The problem with Semmelweis's theory is not that it is complicated, but that it is simple. It is not that it is wrong, but that it is so obviously, demonstrably right, and its very correctness is a profound and unbearable insult. His discovery, after all, carries with it a terrible accusation. It implies that the great Professor Klein, the respected department head, has been presiding over a slaughterhouse for years. It implies that he and his esteemed colleagues, the great men of European medicine, have been personally, if unwittingly, carrying death from the morgue to the maternity ward on their own unwashed hands. It implies that the uneducated midwives next door, with their simple, traditional methods, have been superior practitioners all along. This is a truth that is too humiliating for these proud, important men to accept. Their entire sense of identity, their status as gentlemen, their authority as men of science, is threatened by your simple bowl of chlorinated lime. And so, the establishment begins to push back. The battle you now face is no longer against a microscopic particle. It is against a far more powerful and resilient foe, institutional pride. The attacks on Semmelweis are subtle at first, then increasingly open. You hear the whispers in the hospital corridors, the snide remarks in the lecture halls. They begin to mock him. They call his theory the filth theory, a crude and simplistic idea, unworthy of a Viennese physician. They make jokes about his obsessive insistence on hand washing. The senior doctors are complaining that the chlorine solution is undignified and makes their hands rough. Apparently, a little dry skin is a greater tragedy to them than a ward full of dead mothers. They begin to attack the evidence itself. Professor Klein, in his official lectures to the medical students, dismisses the dramatic drop in the death rate as a mere coincidence. It is likely due to a change in the atmospheric conditions, he declares, his voice booming with unshakable authority, or a shift in the epidemic constitution of the city itself. These fevers have a natural ebb and flow. Dr. Semmelweis has simply been fortunate that his peculiar ritual has coincided with a period of natural remission. You sit in the lecture hall and you listen to this, and you can barely contain your rage. You have seen the charts. You have copied the numbers into the ledgers yourself. You know it is not a coincidence. You know it is a direct result of his actions. But you are a junior doctor, and to challenge a full professor in his own lecture hall would be professional suicide. The core of their resistance is a scientific one, or at least, one that cloaks itself in the language of science. What is the mechanism they demand? What are these so-called cadaverous particles? You cannot see them. You cannot weigh them. You cannot measure them. To attribute so much death to an invisible, hypothetical substance is not science. It is superstition. In a world before the germ theory of disease has been established, Semmelweis has no answer to this question. He can prove that his method works with overwhelming statistical evidence, but he cannot explain why it works in a way that is satisfactory to the existing scientific paradigm. He has discovered a cure without being able to fully explain the disease. And to the proud, theory-obsessed minds of the Vienna School, an effect without a clear, explainable cause is an effect that cannot be trusted. The tragedy of Semmelweis is compounded by his own personality. He is not a diplomat. He is a passionate, intense, and deeply abrasive man. His righteous anger at the needless deaths he has witnessed makes him impatient and intolerant of his colleagues' skepticism. He does not try to gently persuade them. He attacks them. You witness him in the ward, publicly berating a senior physician who has performed a perfunctory hand-washing. Do you want to have this woman's death on your conscience? Professor, he shouts, his voice echoing through the now quiet ward. Is your dignity more important than her life? Wash your hands properly. The professor, humiliated and enraged, storms out, and Semmelweis has made another powerful enemy. Historians of the future will debate the role of his difficult personality in his downfall. Was he a martyr? A prophet destroyed by the ignorance and pride of his peers? Or was he also a victim of his own inability to navigate the treacherous politics of the medical establishment, watching the growing number of his enemies? You suspect that he is both. He is a brilliant doctor, but a terrible politician. He is trying to win a scientific revolution by insulting all the generals. The opposition to him begins to organize. Professor Klein uses all of his considerable influence within the hospital and with the government ministry that oversees it to undermine his troublesome assistant. He blocks Semmelweis's attempts to have his findings officially published by the hospital. He prevents him from being promoted. He begins to build a case that Semmelweis is a fanatic, a madman whose obsessive rituals are a disruption to the orderly running of the clinic. You, and the few other junior doctors who support him, are now in a difficult position. To continue to vocally champion Semmelweis and his methods is to risk your own careers. You see colleagues who were once enthusiastic supporters now growing quiet. distancing themselves from the increasingly isolated and controversial Hungarian doctor, your loyalty is tested. Do you stand with the man you know is right? Or do you protect your own future in an institution that is clearly determined to crush him? The final blow comes in the spring of 1849. Dr. Semmelweis's 2-year contract as an assistant in the first clinic is up for renewal. It should be a formality. He is the man who has single-handedly solved the clinic's greatest problem. The man who has saved the lives of hundreds, perhaps thousands of women. But Professor Klein makes his move. He informs the hospital administration that he will not be recommending a renewal of Dr. Semmelweis's contract. The official reasons given are flimsy administrative restructuring, Semmelweis's difficult temperament, his disruption of the clinic's established routines. The real reason is clear to you. Semmelweis has committed the one unforgivable sin in the hierarchical world of academic medicine. He has proven his superiors wrong, and he has done so in a way that was public, undeniable, and deeply, personally humiliating to them. And for that, he cannot be forgiven. He must be removed. The news is a devastating shock. The man who solved the mystery of the death ward is being driven out. The prophet is being exiled from his own temple. You stand at the entrance to your ward. The basins of chlorinated lime are still there, a testament to his brief, miraculous reign. But you look at them now with a sense of profound dread. You have a terrible sinking feeling that they will not be there for much longer. The forces of pride, of dogma, of institutional arrogance have won. They are about to snatch a terrible defeat from the jaws of a spectacular victory. And you know, with a sickening certainty, that the women of Vienna are about to start dying again. The dismissal of Dr. Semmelweis is not allowed. Dramatic affair. There is no public shaming, no formal inquiry. It is a quiet, bureaucratic execution. His 2-year contract as an assistant in the first clinic simply comes to an end. And Professor Klein, with the full backing of the hospital's administration, declines to renew it. The man who solved the riddle of the death ward is quietly, efficiently, and unceremoniously shown the door. You watch him leave the hospital for the last time. He is a lonely, stooped figure. His usual intense energy replaced by a look of profound, weary defeat. He carries no books, no instruments. He carries only the terrible weight of a truth that no one else is willing to see. He is a prophet, and his own city has just declared him a heretic. The consequences of his departure are immediate, and they are catastrophic. The day after Semmelweis leaves, Professor Klein reasserts his full authority over the clinic. His first act is to undo the revolution. You arrive on the ward in the morning to find that the basins of chlorinated lime are gone. They have been removed, declared an unnecessary and offensive nuisance by the professor. The signs demanding that doctors wash their hands have been taken down. The great, life-saving ritual is over. Professor Klein announces to you and the other junior doctors that the clinic will be returning to its traditional and scientifically sound methods of practice. The brief, miraculous interlude of cleanliness is finished. You and your colleagues return to the old routine. The routine that you now know is a deadly one. You spend your afternoons in the autopsy room, your hands becoming coated in the invisible cadaverous particles of the dead. And then, you walk back to the maternity ward. You do not wash your hands. To do so now would be an act of open defiance against Professor Klein, a sign that you still adhere to the mad theories of the disgraced Hungarian doctor. It would be an act of professional suicide, so you do as you are told. You become a cog in the machine of death once more. You walk from the morgue to the ward, your hands carrying their invisible poison, and you examine your patients. For the first week, nothing happens. The ward is still filled with the women who gave birth during the final days of Semmelweis's regime. They are healthy. They are recovering. A false, terrible sense of calm settles over the clinic. Perhaps Klein was right. Perhaps the drop in the death rate was just a coincidence. A lucky statistical fluctuation. But you, who have seen the charts, who have witnessed the miracle with your own eyes, you know better. You are simply living on borrowed time, on the lingering effects of a banished hygiene. You are waiting for the ghost to return. It does not take long, 10 days after the hand washing stops. It happens. A young woman who had a healthy delivery just 3 days prior develops a chill. You are called to her bedside. Her temperature is rising, her abdomen is tender. You see the familiar, dreaded signs, with a sickening, tragic certainty. What you are witnessing, it is the first new case of childbed fever since the hand washing began. You report it to your superiors. They dismiss it. A single case proves nothing. But then, 2 days later, another woman falls ill, and another. The fire's been reignited. The ghost is back, and it is hungry. The death rate in the first clinic begins to climb again. It is a horrifying, real-time reversal of the miracle you witnessed. The great experiment is now being run in reverse, with equally damning and predictable results. The mortality rate, which had been near zero under Semmelweis, climbs back to 5%, then 10%. By the end of the year, it will be back to its old, terrifying, scandalous level of nearly 1 in 5 women dying. Your life becomes a special kind of hell. It is one thing to work in a death ward when you do not know the cause. It is a tragedy, an act of God, a mystery. But it is another thing entirely to work in a death ward when you know, with absolute scientific certainty, why the women are dying, and you are utterly powerless to stop it. The ledger, your grim book of numbers, once again becomes a chronicle of death. You dip your quill in the ink and you write the names of the dead, your hand shaking with a mixture of grief and rage. Each name is an accusation. Each entry is a testament to the stubborn, murderous pride of your superiors. The hospital is back to normal. The professors are happy, their dignity is intact, their hands are soft and unchapped, and the new mothers are dying at an impressive and predictable rate. You try to find small ways to resist. You wash your own hands with soap and water as often as you can, discreetly, when no one is watching. But what good does it do? You are one man in a system that is saturated with the filth of the morgue. You watch your colleagues, your friends, move from bed to bed, their hands unwashed, and you see them as angels of death, unknowingly spreading the poison. You are trapped in a state of helpless complicity. You think constantly of Semmelweis. You hear that he has been unable to find another position in Vienna. Professor Klein's influence is too great. His reputation has been systematically destroyed. He has been labeled a fanatic, a troublemaker, a man whose theories are an embarrassment to the Vienna school. You think about what might have been if only Semmelweis had been a different man. If only he had been a smooth diplomat, a man who could gently and patiently persuade his powerful colleagues. Instead of a fiery prophet who shouted at them, was it just their pride that defeated him? Or was it also his own? This is the great what if that will haunt the history of medicine. Could a different personality have saved the man and his discovery? From exile, could decades of needless death have been avoided if the truth had been delivered with a more palatable bedside manner? The final, bitter blow comes in the following year, 1850. Unable to find work, unable to get his findings published, his spirit broken by the rejection of his own peers. Ignaz Semmelweis leaves Vienna. He returns to his native Hungary, a prophet driven into exile. You hear the news of his departure, and you feel a profound sense of loss. The one man who held the truth has been banished, and you are left behind, a prisoner in a system of institutionalized, arrogant, and lethal ignorance. That evening, you stand at the bedside of another dying young mother. She is delirious with fever, her breath shallow. You know that you will be seeing her again tomorrow. In the autopsy room, you look at her face, and then you look at your own hands. You have washed them, but they do not feel clean. They will never feel clean again. You are a doctor in the finest hospital in Europe, And your main job is to try and to fail, to not kill your patients with the tools of your own trade. The great, terrible mystery of the two clinics has returned. But it is no longer a mystery. It is a choice. A choice that the men who run your world have made. A choice to let their pride weigh more than the lives of the women they have sworn to protect. Dr. Semmelweis is gone. Exiled not by a formal decree, but by the quiet, unified, and unyielding wall of institutional pride. He has returned to his native Hungary, leaving you and the other junior doctors behind in the once reformed, now relapsed death ward of the Vienna General Hospital. The years that follow are a long, slow, and grinding lesson in the power of dogma over evidence. Life in the first clinic reverts to its old, lethal normalcy. The basins of chlorinated lime are a forgotten memory. The doctors and students once again move freely between the autopsy room and the delivery ward, their hands and their consciences unscrubbed. And the women continue to die. You are no longer a new, naive student. You are now a more senior doctor, a man with experience and a quiet, simmering rage that you must keep carefully hidden. You are a secret keeper of a forbidden knowledge. You know why the women in your care are dying. You know that their deaths are not acts of God, but the direct result of the arrogance and ignorance of your superiors. Every death certificate you sign feels like an act of complicity. Every funeral is a testament to a truth that the world has chosen to ignore. Your only connection to Dr. Semmelweis, the man you still consider your true master, is through the mail and the occasional medical journal that makes its way to the hospital library. You follow his lonely, frustrating struggle from afar, and it is a tragedy in slow motion. You learn that Semmelweis has taken a position at a small maternity hospital in Budapest. It is an unsalaried, relatively unimportant post. A far cry from the prestige of the Vienna General Hospital. But there, free from the oversight of Professor Klein, he immediately institutes his hand-washing policy. You manage to get a copy of a report from his new hospital. The results are the same. The death rate from childbed fever in his ward plummets to less than 1%. He has proven that his discovery was not a Viennese anomaly. It is a universal truth. He has the evidence. He has the data. He has the proof. But the world refuses to listen. His revolutionary discovery is met by the European medical establishment with a wall of silence, of ridicule, of contempt. You hear the reasons, the justifications, whispered in the corridors and lecture halls of your own hospital. He is a Hungarian, not one of the German-speaking elite who control the medical world. He is a mere obstetrician, not a true scientist like the great pathologists. His theory is too simple, too simplistic. It lacks the complex philosophical grandeur of the established theories of miasma and humoral imbalance. And then, after years of being ignored, Semmelweis decides he will make them listen. In 1861, he finally publishes his great life's work, a book titled The Etiology, Concept, and Prophylaxis of Childbed Fever. You manage to obtain a copy, sent to you by a sympathetic colleague in Budapest. It is a difficult book. It is a work of pure genius and of pure, undiluted, and self-destructive rage. The first half is a masterpiece of epidemiological reasoning. It is filled with page after page of meticulous statistical tables, the same kind of data you once helped him compile, proving beyond any doubt the connection between the cadaverous particles and the fever. But the second half of the book is a disaster. It is a furious, unrestrained, and deeply personal attack on every single one of his critics. He calls the great and respected professors of Europe irresponsible homicides. He refers to their arguments against his theory as the babbling of ignorant old men. He does not try to persuade his opponents. He tries to bludgeon them into submission with the sheer, angry force of his own certainty. The reaction from the medical establishment is predictable. They ignore the data and focus on the tone. They dismiss the book as the work of a bitter, arrogant, and possibly insane man. His brilliant, life-saving message is completely lost because the world cannot stand the sound of its messenger. It's the 19th century equivalent of leaving a one-star review for a life-saving manual because you didn't like the font. You read the book in the privacy of your own rooms, and your heart sinks. You know he is right. Every word of his science is true. But you also know that his anger, his refusal to be diplomatic, has doomed his own discovery. The rejection sends Semmelweis into a spiral of increasing desperation and fury. He begins a campaign of writing and publishing open letters addressed to the most famous obstetricians in Europe. They are not scientific correspondence. They are declarations of war. You read one of them, published in a medical journal. He directly addresses the great Professor Siebold of Berlin. I have been forced to witness the deaths of countless women at the hands of their own physicians. He writes, "And so I declare before God and the world that you, Herr Professor, are a murderer, and the medical history of childbed fever would not be unjustly written if it were to characterize you as a medical Nero." You put the journal down, a feeling of cold dread washing over you. This is not how science is done. This is not how you convince your peers. This is professional suicide. He has gone from being an ignored prophet to being a raving lunatic in the eyes of his profession. You are now faced with a terrible conflict. You believe in his work with all your heart. But how can you publicly defend a man who is calling your own superiors murderers? How can you align yourself with a man who has made himself a pariah? You try to subtly implement his methods in your own practice, to be meticulous about your own cleanliness. But you are one man in a vast, contaminated system. You try to argue his case with your junior colleagues, but they just shake their heads and show you his latest, furious letter. This is the great, tragic debate of Semmelweis's life. Can a vital, life-saving truth be rejected simply because its discoverer is abrasive and unlikable? Does the personality of the scientist matter more than the quality of his evidence? The answer, you are sadly forced to conclude, is yes. The history of science is not just a history of ideas. It is a history of people, with all their pride, their prejudices, and their vanities. The news from Budapest grows more disturbing. Semmelweis's behavior becomes more erratic. His public pronouncements become more and more unhinged. He begins to drink heavily. He alienates his last remaining supporters. You hear rumors that his family is deeply concerned for his mental health. The man who fought so hard to save others from a deadly sickness is now being consumed by a sickness of his own mind. A sickness born of years of frustration, of rejection, of watching thousands of women die needlessly because the world refused to listen to him. The final, tragic news arrives in the summer of 1865. You hear it from a colleague who has just returned from a conference in Hungary. The story is a garbled, horrific mess. Semmelweis's friends and family, concerned by his severe depression and erratic public behavior, had tricked him into visiting a local asylum. When he realized where he was, he had tried to flee. He had struggled with the guards. In the struggle, he had sustained a small wound on his hand. The wound had become infected. He had died, alone in the asylum, from a raging septicemia, a form of blood poisoning. You sit in your office in the Vienna General Hospital, the place where the story began, and you absorb the full, crushing weight of the irony. Ignaz Semmelweis, the man who discovered that childbed fever was caused by doctors transmitting infectious particles from corpses into the bodies of their patients, has died from an infected wound, likely caused by a dirty hand or instrument. He has become a final, tragic victim of the very same kind of ignorant filth that he had spent his entire life fighting against. You look out the window at the great, confident, scientific institution that is your hospital. You think of the hundreds of women who are still dying in its maternity wards, dying from a preventable infection. And you think of the lonely, broken man who had the cure, and who was destroyed by the world's refusal to accept it. His desperate, lonely struggle is over. And the world, for now, remains lost in a darkness of its own making, the tragic, lonely death of your master. Ignaz Semmelweis is a quiet, ignominious end to a brilliant and tormented life. He is a man destroyed by the truth he discovered, back in Vienna, in the great hospital that rejected him. His ghost haunts the halls of the first obstetrical clinic. You, and the few other junior doctors who witnessed his miracle, are the secret keepers of his legacy, but the world moves on. The hand-washing basins are not returned. Professor Klein's traditional deadly methods remain firmly in place, and the mothers continue to die. You survive. You learn the hard lesson that a young doctor in a rigidly hierarchical institution must learn. You keep your head down. You do your work. You follow the orders of your superiors, even when you know those orders are a death sentence for your patients. You learn to live with the quiet, corrosive guilt. It is the price of your career. Years pass. You are no longer a junior doctor. You are now a man in your mid-career, a senior physician, an assistant professor yourself. You have your own students now. The Vienna of the 1860s and 70s is a city alive with new ideas, new art, new music. But the practice of medicine in the great hospital seems frozen in time, still governed by the ancient theories of humors and miasmas. Childbed fever is still a persistent, tragic, and accepted reality of childbirth. It is seen as a kind of unavoidable hospital-based thunderstorm, a natural phenomenon that, for unknown reasons, strikes some women and not others. And then, news begins to arrive from France. Strange, controversial, and electrifying news. It comes in the form of papers published in the scientific journals. Papers by a French chemist. A chemist, not a physician, a man named Louis Pasteur. You read his work in the hospital library, and as you do, you feel the ghost of your old master stirring at your shoulder. Pasteur's work is not about hospitals or childbed fever. It is about wine and beer and the souring of milk. But his conclusions are so radical, so revolutionary, that they threaten to upend the entire foundation of medical science. He argues that the process of fermentation and the process of putrefaction are not spontaneous chemical events. They are, he insists, caused by tiny, living creatures, organisms that are invisible to the naked eye, that float in the air and in the dust. He calls them germs. You read the descriptions of his brilliant, elegant experiments. You read about his famous swan neck flasks, which prove that a sterile broth will remain sterile forever as long as it is protected from the dust in the air. But if the neck of the flask is broken, allowing the invisible germs of the air to enter, the broth will quickly putrefy to your colleagues in Vienna. This is the work of a crackpot, a chemist's fantasy. Professor Klein, now an old and even more obstinately conservative man, scoffs in the lecture hall. The man thinks the air is filled with tiny, invisible animals. It is a return to the superstitions of the Dark Ages. We are men of science. We believe in observable phenomena, not in imaginary beasties. But you read Pasteur's words, and a chill runs down your spine. Invisible living creatures, carried in the air, that cause putrefaction. It sounds hauntingly. Precisely like the cadaverous particles that Dr. Semmelweis had spoken of all those years ago. The invisible something on the hands of the doctors, carried from the corpses to the mothers. The scientific mechanism that Semmelweis could never provide. The explanation that his critics used to destroy him is now being uncovered by a French chemist in a wine bottle. The news from Pasteur's laboratory continues to astound. You read of his work on the great silkworm disease that was devastating the French silk industry. Pasteur, after years of painstaking work with his microscope, proves that the disease is caused by a specific, identifiable microbe. More importantly, he proves that the disease can be contained and eliminated by identifying and isolating the infected worms. By practicing a kind of microscopic quarantine, the implications are staggering. If a microbe can cause a disease in a silkworm, can it not also cause a disease in a human? The resistance from the medical establishment is immense. The acceptance of germ theory was not a simple or immediate process. It was a long, bitter, and hard-fought war against centuries of entrenched medical dogma. Historians would later debate the reasons for this resistance. Was it a genuine, healthy scientific skepticism? Or was it the simple human pride of a profession that was deeply unwilling to accept that its most fundamental mysteries were being solved by an outsider, a chemist, a man who was not even a proper doctor? You become a secret, fervent follower of Pasteur's work. You acquire every journal, every paper he publishes. You see that he is building, piece by piece, the scientific foundation that would have saved your old master. Semmelweis was a man who had discovered a new continent but was unable to draw a map. Pasteur was drawing the map. The final, undeniable proof comes not from France, but from Germany. A young country doctor named Robert Koch, inspired by Pasteur's work. Takes it a step further, he is investigating anthrax, a deadly disease that affects cattle and sheep. He manages to isolate the specific bacterium that causes the disease. He grows it in a pure culture in his laboratory. And then he takes this pure culture and injects it into a healthy mouse. The mouse develops anthrax and dies. He has, for the first time in history, proven beyond any doubt that a specific germ causes a specific disease. The age of miasmas is over. The age of bacteriology has begun. You read Koch's paper in the hospital library, and you feel a sense of profound, world-changing vindication. This is it. This is the final, irrefutable proof. Childbed fever is not a mystery. It is not an imbalance of the humors. It is not a punishment from an angry saint. It is a germ. It is a tiny, living creature. Likely the same kind of streptococcal bacterium that causes wound infections. That is carried from the corpses in the autopsy room, on the hands of the doctors, and is introduced into the bodies of the new mothers. The entire puzzle is solved. The ghost has a name. You. Now a senior physician with a reputation of your own. Try to bring this new science to your colleagues. You present Pasteur's papers at a hospital conference. You describe Koch's brilliant experiments. You argue that the high death rate in your own maternity ward is not a mystery, but a simple and solvable problem of contamination. And you are met with the same wall of stubborn, arrogant resistance that Semmelweis faced. Germs. Professor Klein scoffs at you. My dear doctor, you have been reading too many French novels. You will be telling me next that we should fight fevers with soap and water. The irony of his statement is so thick, so profound, that you can only stare at him in stunned silence. The great Vienna General Hospital, once the most advanced medical center in the world, has become a backwater, a museum of outdated and deadly ideas, a place where the professors are more concerned with protecting their own pride and their ancient theories than with embracing the new science that could save the lives of their patients. You stand at the window of your office, looking out at the sprawling courtyards of the hospital. The scientific world is being remade. A revolution is happening. And yet, in your own ward, just down the hall, a young woman who gave birth this morning is likely developing a fever that will kill her, a fever that you now know with absolute certainty is entirely preventable. The truth is finally known. The science is finally clear. But the practice, here in this great and prideful institution, remains murderously, stubbornly, the same, and no one. In all the excited talk of the new germ theory, not a single person in the great lecture halls of Vienna ever mentions the name of the forgotten, exiled, and tragic Hungarian doctor who had told them the truth 20 years ago. The world is catching up to Ignaz Semmelweis, but it has not yet remembered his name. The news of Dr. Semmelweis's death in the asylum arrives in Vienna not as a great tragedy, but as a piece of quiet, embarrassing gossip. He is remembered, if at all, as the strange Hungarian doctor who had a fanatical obsession with hand-washing and a gift for making powerful enemies. His great work is unpublished in any major language. His statistical proof is buried in obscure Hungarian journals. His revolution is, for all intents and purposes, dead with him. You continue your career at the Vienna General Hospital, a man carrying a secret truth in a world committed to a comfortable lie. The years pass. You rise in the ranks. Your own skill as a physician, earning you a reputation for competence. If not for brilliance, you are quiet. You are cautious. You do not challenge the authority of your superiors. You have learned the hard lesson that being right is not enough. The first clinic remains a place of quiet. Predictable tragedy? The death rate from childbed fever ebbs and flows with the seasons. But it is always there, a permanent, accepted feature of the hospital, like the stone gargoyles on the roof. You do what you can. You try to maintain a level of personal cleanliness that is unusual for your time. You teach your own students to be gentle in their examinations. But you are one man, and the system is a great, unthinking, and deeply contaminated machine. And then, from across Europe, a new scientific wind begins to blow. It is a wind that will eventually scour the filth from the halls of your hospital, and in doing so, vindicate the ghost of your forgotten master. You begin to read, in the international medical journals, the work of a Scottish surgeon from Glasgow named Joseph Lister. He is a quiet, methodical, and deeply thoughtful man. And he has been reading the revolutionary papers of the French chemist, Louis Pasteur. Lister, like you, has spent his career in a world of post-surgical infection. He knows that even the most brilliantly executed operation is often followed by the familiar, horrifying sequence of inflammation, pus, gangrene, and death. But unlike the physicians of your establishment, Lister believes Pasteur. He believes that the cause of this post-surgical putrefaction is not some spontaneous process or humoral imbalance. He believes it is the invisible germs from the air, from the surgeon's hands, from the instruments themselves, getting into the wound. And so he begins to fight the germs. He searches for a chemical that can kill these invisible creatures. And he finds one in carbolic acid, a foul-smelling, oily substance derived from coal tar, a substance used at the time to disinfect city sewers and to treat the wood of railway ties. It is a crude, industrial, and deeply unglamorous chemical. But Lister begins to use it in his operating theater. He designs a device, a clumsy, hand-pumped sprayer, that fills the air of the room with a fine mist of carbolic acid. He soaks his surgical instruments in it. He soaks the dressings for the wound in it. And, most importantly, he washes his own hands in a carbolic solution before and after every operation. The results are stunning. They are a mirror image of the miracle you witnessed with Semmelweis 20 years earlier. The wards under Lister's care are transformed. The stench of gangrene disappears. His patients' wounds heal cleanly. They survive surgeries that were once a certain death sentence. He has not just improved surgery, he has revolutionized it. He has created the science of antiseptic surgery. You read Lister's papers with a sense of profound, almost painful, vindication. It is Semmelweis's discovery all over again. But this time, it is armed with a theory. Lister can explain the why, the cadaverous particles that Semmelweis could only hypothesize about. Lister can now call germs. The mysterious putrefaction is now understood as a bacterial infection, the chlorine Semmelweis used to remove a smell, and the carbolic acid Lister uses to kill a microbe, are two different weapons in the same war, a war against an enemy that has, until now, been invisible. The world of medicine is more prepared to listen to Lister than it was to Semmelweis. Pasteur and Koch have laid the groundwork. Germ theory is now a respectable, if still debated, scientific concept, and Lister himself is a canny diplomat. He is a respected surgeon, and he presents his findings with a quiet, unshakable scientific humility, not with the angry, polemical rage of your old master. You know that the time has come. You are no longer a junior doctor. You are a man of status and authority within the Vienna hospital, and you will no longer be silent. You decide to bring the Listerian revolution to your own ward. You procure a supply of carbolic acid. The smell of it is harsh and industrial, not the laundry-like scent of chlorine, but the smell of a new, more powerful, and more scientific age. You go before the hospital board, now made up of a new, younger generation of physicians. The old guard, like Professor Klein, are mostly retired or dead. You do not speak of Semmelweis. You know his name is still a source of controversy and embarrassment. Instead, you speak of Lister. You speak of the new germ theory. You present your case not as a return to an old, discredited idea, but as an adoption of the very latest in modern scientific practice. You meet with some resistance, but you are now the establishment. You are a professor, and you are persuasive. You are given permission to implement the new antiseptic protocols in the first clinic. You feel a profound sense of historical irony. You are fighting your master's old battle, but you are winning it by using the name of another man. The transformation of your ward begins. You install basins filled with a dilute carbolic acid solution at the entrance. You make hand washing with this solution mandatory for all doctors and students. You order that all surgical instruments be boiled in water before use. You insist that the bed linens be changed with a new and obsessive frequency. You create your own version of Lister's carbolic sprayer, and the air in your delivery rooms is now filled with its fine, acrid mist. Your younger colleagues complain about the smell, about the extra work, just as you once did. But they obey, and the results are exactly what you knew they would be. The death rate from childbed fever in the first clinic, which had remained stubbornly, tragically high for 2 decades, plummets once more. It drops to under 1%, and it stays there. The ghost has been exorcised from your ward, this time for good. The success is undeniable. Other clinics in the hospital begin to adopt your methods. The great Vienna General Hospital, so long a bastion of resistance to the simple idea of cleanliness, finally, belatedly, enters the antiseptic age. The victory is immense, and it is deeply, profoundly bittersweet. One evening, you are standing in your ward. It is quiet. It is the quiet of health, not of death. You see the rows of beds filled with healthy mothers, their newborn infants sleeping peacefully beside them. You see a sight that would have been an impossible miracle in your youth, a ward full of life. You have won. You have finished the fight that Semmelweis started. You have brought his truth back into the very hospital that cast him out. But your victory is a private one. The young doctors who now practice these life-saving techniques have likely never even heard the name Ignaz Semmelweis. They speak with reverence of Pasteur, of Koch, of Lister. They do not know that a lonely, angry Hungarian doctor had discovered the same truth through pure, brilliant observation a generation earlier. You look at the healthy mothers and their babies, and you feel a quiet, deep, and lasting sense of peace. But you also feel a profound sadness for the man who was not there to see it, the Savior who died before his salvation was accepted. His ghost is at rest now, but his name is still lost in the shadows. The years pass, and the world of medicine is remade. You live to see the great scientific revolution that your old master, Ignaz Semmelweis, had only dimly foreshadowed. The germ theory of disease, once a radical and mocked idea, becomes the undisputed foundational truth of all medical science. The work of Pasteur, of Koch, of Lister, becomes the new gospel, and the practice of medicine is transformed. You, now an old and respected professor of medicine in Vienna, a man with white hair and a long memory, live and work in this new world. You walk the halls of the Vienna General Hospital, the very same halls where you once walked as a terrified young doctor. But now, the air is different. It smells clean, of carbolic acid and sterilized linen. The doctors no longer walk directly from the autopsy room to the maternity ward. They now scrub their hands and arms with antiseptic soaps. They change their coats. They boil their instruments. They practice a ritual of cleanliness that would have once been seen as an obsessive madness. And in your old clinic, the first obstetrical clinic, the death ward is no more. Childbed fever has been vanquished. It is now a rare and tragic accident, not a predictable and horrifying epidemic. The simple, life-saving truth that your master discovered has, through a long and bloody detour, finally become common practice. You are a man who has lived through a paradigm shift. You have seen the high priests of an old, flawed religion be replaced by the scientists of a new, more effective one. You watch the young medical students of this new generation, with their easy confidence in their microscopes and their sterile techniques. They speak of streptococcus and sepsis with a casual familiarity. They cannot possibly comprehend a world where doctors were the primary carriers of death, where a gentleman's pride was more important than a patient's life. You, however, remember, you are a living fossil, a relic of that dark and ignorant age, and in your old age, you witness the final posthumous act of the Semmelweis tragedy, his vindication. The process is slow. It begins with a few inquisitive medical historians, men who are digging through the old hospital archives, trying to understand the history of childbed fever. They are puzzled by the old records. They see the strange, dramatic spike and then the sudden, miraculous fall in the mortality rates in your clinic in the late 1840s. And they see that it coincides perfectly with the brief, turbulent tenure of a strange Hungarian assistant named Ignaz Semmelweis. One of these young historians comes to you. You are one of the last living physicians who worked at the hospital during that time. He interviews you in your dusty, book-lined study. He asks you about the old days, about Professor Klein, about the mystery of the two clinics, and you, with the quiet, steady voice of a man unburdening his soul of a secret he has carried for a lifetime. You tell him the whole story. You tell him about the autopsies and the unwashed hands. You tell him about the death of Jakob Kolitschka. You tell him about the basins of chlorinated lime. You tell him about the charts, the numbers, the undeniable proof. And you tell him about the pride, the arrogance, and the institutional blindness that rejected the truth and drove its discoverer into exile and madness. You give him your old logbooks, your private journals from that time, which you have kept hidden for 50 years, your testimony, combined with the rediscovered work of Semmelweis himself, becomes the spark for a great historical reevaluation. The story is published. The medical world, which had forgotten him, is stunned. They look back at his work, at his statistics, and they see it for what it was, a work of staggering, observational genius, a discovery that was decades ahead of its time. The man who was once dismissed as a crank, a fanatic, a madman, is now hailed as a lost hero, a martyr of science, the savior of mothers. The vindication is total, and it is international. You see new medical textbooks being written, and in the chapter on the history of antiseptic practice. Before the names of Lister and Pasteur, there's now a new first chapter. It is the chapter on Ignaz Semmelweis. One day, you are invited to a special ceremony in his native Budapest. The city has decided to erect a statue in his honor. You travel there, an old man making one last pilgrimage. You stand in a great public square, surrounded by the most famous physicians and scientists of Europe. The very kind of men who once would have scorned him. You listen as they give grand speeches, praising his courage, his genius, his sacrifice. They speak of him as a great hero of humanity. You listen to the speeches, and you feel a strange mixture of triumph and a deep, bitter sadness. It is wonderful to hear his name spoken with reverence, but it has come 50 years too late. You look up at the bronze statue as it is unveiled. He stands there, immortalized in metal, looking out over the city with a noble, heroic expression. They have, You think with a wry, internal smile, conveniently left out the part where he spent most of his life looking furious. Smelling faintly of bleach and shouting at his colleagues, you live out your last few years in quiet peace. Your long battle is over. The ghost of your master has finally been laid to rest. His name has been cleared, his discovery celebrated, his place in the pantheon of medical heroes secured. You sit in your study, an old man surrounded by his books. You have a new textbook on your desk, the one written by the young historian you spoke 2 years ago. You open it to the introduction. You read the story of the great pioneers who fought the unseen world of germs. You see the names of the giants Pasteur, Koch, Lister, and then, at the very beginning of the story, you see him, Ignaz Philipp Semmelweis. The book tells his story correctly. It tells of his brilliant discovery, of his tragic struggle, and of his ultimate, posthumous triumph. You close the book, a feeling of profound and final peace settling over you. The memory is safe now. The truth is finally told. Your duty as the keeper of his flame is done. The vindicated ghost can now truly rest. The old doctor closes the book, its story finally complete. The light from the window of his Viennese study is soft and golden. The light of a day's end. The ghosts of the death ward. The memory of the unwashed hands. The angry, brilliant shade of his forgotten master they all recede, fading into the quiet. Gentle peace of a life's work finally done. Let the story of his long, frustrating, and ultimately vindicated journey now fade as well. Dissolving into the calm and stillness of the evening, your own journey is also at its end. Leave the gaslit streets of 19th century Vienna behind. Leave the great, echoing halls of the hospital, the scent of carbolic acid, the weight of its history. Return now to the simple. Present comfort of your own quiet room, a place of safety and of peace. Feel the rhythm of your own breathing, a slow, deep, and effortless tide. With each breath, feel the last tensions of the day being washed away. Your mind, which has traveled so far tonight, can now come to rest. The stories are over. The history is written. All that is left is the gentle, welcoming silence of the night. The darkness behind your eyes is a soft and soothing balm. It is a space without struggle, without conflict, without the long, hard fight for the truth. It is a place of simple, easy acceptance. Allow yourself to sink into this darkness, to be held by its quiet embrace. Let go of the day, let go of the story, and drift, peacefully and serenely, into a deep and restorative sleep.